down there and checked one. Had the wrong gears in it.
Oh, that one you went and looked at John Henry's? It ain't gonna work?
342, now we get 373. I wanted to buy that whole truck. Shoot, man. But if that had transmission in it.
Hey, just put mud grips on that white truck. You'll be all right.
Exactly right.
You hear that? That's what I'm gonna wind up doing anyway, so that's what I'm gonna do.
Hey, why buy another truck when he's already got one?
Look, I don't do it.
Why? It's already got over 100,000 miles on it. That's what her car, correct me if I'm wrong, her car was always the fancy car, and your truck was the work truck. Is that the way it's always been? Always. Why did I get this?
I thought you was gonna leave something.
Is the town truck four-wheel drive? There you go.
But it's all.
Which one is? The white one?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Well, it's working better than what you currently have.
What's stop sign? Yeah, I usually blow right through that one. And then when you went by, I was like, that's Joel's off-duty car. You don't even have a police tag on there. That's truly undercover.
All day.
Where is he undercover? So I'll know.
He's like, I saw you go by the first time. And I saw you go by the first time, and I thought, you go come right up.
Why didn't he go do something different?
Some of those other work gets you. I would have only been saying that
I've arrested him like 10 times. Probably. And he's also been convicted of
So I love to hear it because nothing else, because I know.
It's not the rest, it's just what it is.
I mean, this is
I'm not I'm just like that.
I'm making fun of him.
every time we had a premiere, it was always but it's at 11 and 1, and it's here now. So. Text me after y'all go something.
We'll follow you.
If you think about it.
What you gonna do? Look all like 50 and like salesman.
Wait, who did you?
You look all corporate salesman. Good, man.
I'm like, I'm thinking,
Well put
I'm
together,
right
you know?
there, like,
He didn't really go through the highlighter clothes like Tyler did. He did. I didn't remember not as bad. I was going. He didn't peacock like Tyler did. My boy Blue. I love that. Like you get like some random movie references that like you always do.
That was actually a very inappropriate time.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. You're my boy, Blue.
Whatever, my arms and shoulders fall
That's exactly what he told me. He's like, I just finally got my back.
All right, that's all. Yeah, go.
He's like, I said,
Thank you, sweet.
beat you all.
Y'all have been good at basketball. This year's coming out strong. The year of the coronavirus, y'all were stacked and ready to go. That's at least 8 round 4. Y'all was good at that year, man.
How about you, kid?
That's pretty rare. When you sell all 5, usually that's not good.
Yeah.
They violated it. But then they got substantial. As always, what they get caught for is stealing. They've already been inside.
I didn't even look at them.
Hey, you off the wagon? Or you back on the wagon? Or
You better explain that. Good.
hey, nobody told you could come on the sheep side over here. You can stay over here with the goats. You don't need to.
Holidays and being sick for a couple weeks. Y'all that's because I remember texting you about all what I needed to do. And you said, hey, we were out of town. And then you had your mom this past Sunday. Does she have full time at home?
Most of the time,
All the short term, it's the short term or the long term? Does that affect her as far as like remembering what she's doing? Like, did she complete cooking the meal safely?
well, I'm not really sure if it's what we just talked about eating well.
What's the she taking medication? Does she have like daily market boxes?
That's the downside. We got to be she's willing to take a risk. She's not trying
She wanted some.
She
Needed that.
but it's going to I see it. She's starting to she's saying very cheap.
Well, my grandpa got to the point like they moved him into like a very nice where he had his own room in a facility, and he literally thought it was home. He'd be like, "Why are these people?" Like he'd see like the nurse or whatever walking down. What are these people doing in my home? Like, he literally, I mean, but that was towards the very end.
Well, part of what winning our decision is
As long as you can. So does your sister, I guess, live here?
She's in Jackson.
Is that where your mom is? Where's the river? And so your sister comes and stays multiple days?
She'll come on Tuesday morning.
I mean, does she ever feel scared by herself? She likes being there. And she's capable like calling easily if she needs something. She didn't retain that question.
As soon as I finish that,
Crazy with that. Just, I mean, just like so somebody can take advantage of her, or someone that, you know, phone call that you.
yes, she can withdraw it right here.
So just like some irons or something like they pray.
Oh, yeah.
Huh? Oh, it's I haven't. I normally don't send out Wednesday night. I will. Is he sick? It's going around. Just that's right.
Now you got that song stuck in my head.
What song? I already forgot. I got a stupid song stuck in my head that I don't even like in my own head.
Yeah, well, the song that's stuck in my
That's not a good song.
head. It's not.
Hey, why don't you quit being a bad influence on me, Joel? You're bad. Hey, why don't you sit down so we can start class? Look at you. We're past time. Hey. 3 minutes past. 3 minutes.
I'm sitting.
3 minutes past, sir. 3 minutes. So that means I'm going 30 minutes over tonight. I'm gonna go 10 minutes for every minute that you're sitting there. Anybody need to like fake cough and sneak out the back door while you still got a chance? Yeah. Yeah, is that an option? Yvonne, aren't you? I'm feeling feverish. Bill, take me home. Oh. Feel better? My noodle. I rode back and forth to a funeral in Williston today and was listening to a podcast. Son, my noodle has been, and guess what? I'm going to try to filter through all that and share it with y'all. And it's all on this same stuff, man. The word Elohim, the word for God, and El and spiritual beings and stuff in Genesis that's there that I never like just read right past. And it's all has to do with this heavenly realm stuff and the sons of God stuff. Y'all remember all that we've talked about? Like sons of God, daughters of men, and this angels and demons, God and Satan, and all of that stuff. It is a never-ending, refreshing, new as each morning. Like you cannot exhaust the study of this. No matter how much you think you know something, I've read, I know that one. And they started, I was like, I almost was half listening when they were going through it. Like, I know. I mean, I preached that passage. And I'm sitting there going, man, it's just, Bible study's good, y'all. It's good. So hopefully you get a small taste of that tonight. I feel like that's kind of, like totally kind of off script. Part of my job and the blessing of my job, because of y'all's support, I get the time to do that. I get the time to study, to dig. And then part of my work is then to like boil all that down into a palatable way then to share with you all. Now, does that mean that you don't need to study on your own? Absolutely not. But if I can find nuggets, kind of like the way I thought it in my head, I don't mean to be disrespectful at all, but like I'm kind of a Cliff Notes guy. Not that I don't appreciate the whole, and I will read the whole, but usually you don't have time for the whole. You got to find a way to boil it down and make it palatable. And that's kind of what I do. The guy whose funeral was today, he's 92, I think, years old, had been a preacher for a lot of years, actually in the Christian church, and then he kind of came to the Church of Christ when I was in Ocala. And he and his son and I were very close. And even though his son's probably 25 years older than me, but he and I were like just really good friends. This gentleman, Mr. Roberts, he kept extensive like records of his ministry, probably baptized close to 10,000 people. 10,000 people in Ocala and Dunnell and a little work up north. I mean, this guy was like, one of his favorite sayings that I learned today, put the jelly on the bottom shelf, is what he'd tell people. And what he meant was about the gospel. Like with every sermon, put the jelly on like it ought to be, the goodness of the gospel ought to be easy to reach for everybody. Like take whatever you're studying and get it where, I thought that was kind of a neat quote. Put the jelly on the bottom shelf. So I'm gonna hang on to that one for a little bit. That's what I want to be as a preacher. All right, so let's dig into the temptation of Jesus. You and Matt been whittling on it a little bit, and so now we all get to whittle on it together. And we're gonna have some God and Satan going after it and some other stuff. All right. Before we get started, anything we need to pray about before we get rolling? Anything in particular you want to make mention of? How about Jenny? I'm going to ask you to lead us here in just a second, just so you have time to prepare. Caroline, they're home. They're figuring out. She's going to be on a PICC line at home, they said, for at least another 4 weeks. She's got to take medication pretty regularly throughout the day. Mama gets to sleep about 5 hours, And I guess like they had to replace the PICC line today. And Grandpa came there, and she even tried to say, Dad, you know, you may want to leave until this is over. And he's like, no, I can handle it. And having to like actually like hold her down forcibly so they can do it. And Grandpa left crying. Like, you know what I mean? It's just hard to see a youngin' that doesn't get it. Now she's, other than that part of it, they said she's like eating again and she's more of herself, but it's just like till that infection, until that clock's gone, she's got to be on a couple of different things. So just they're home, but it's a long road. So just be mindful of her. They said there is a chance. I was just texting with one of his daughters. There's a chance that he could get a go home maybe by the end of the month, but it would still be like a lot of therapy. He had to go to Shands kind of over the holidays, and now he's back in that like rehab facility right there. It's actually really close to the Trenton Church of Christ. There's a small chance he can go home by the end of it, but it's a long road. It's a long road of leg usage and what to even do and circulation. It's going to be a. I have not seen. We're not in this. Their daughters didn't play soccer this year, so I don't get to see Jessica nearly as often. Do you know? He's still in rehab, so he's not home either.
He's alive.
That's right. But that's kind of the way Rod says it. I have a whole new appreciation for. You know, I'm here and I'm blessed, so ain't nothing wrong with that. Anybody else? Anything else? All right, T-Bone, if you don't mind, get us started with that.
Dear Heavenly Father, thanks for allowing us to be able to come here safely and to be able to learn more about you. Please be with everyone that we've mentioned here tonight, everyone that we've failed to mention. Please be with anyone that hasn't been able to hear your word and allow us to be able to spread it to Jesus, I pray.
Amen. All right, go to Matthew 4. This one's really easy to remember. Matthew 4 and Luke 4 are the two long accounts of Jesus being tempted in the wilderness. There is a small little blurb in Mark. It's like 1 or 2 verses only. Basically, he just goes to the wilderness to be tempted. But Matthew 4 and Luke chapter 4 are the longer kind of detailed versions of Jesus going and being tempted in the wilderness. I told y'all to go to Matthew, but I actually have to go with one other passage first, just to make this make sense. I apologize. That is where we're going. That is the meat of where we're going. I want you to know that. You can keep a finger there, but I need you to read like 2 passages in Hebrews with me first to like make Matthew 4 be what it needs to be. That's where we're going to be, but I need to do Hebrews real quick. Before I even get, I have to do this first. Because this matters. Look at Hebrews 4:15. Shane, I'm going to let you read that if you don't mind in just a second. And then Mr. Bill Hartsfield, do you mind doing Hebrews 2:18 here in just a second? So Hebrews 4:15 and then Hebrews 2:18. Shane, if you want to hit yours.
But we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin.
Why is that relevant? Before we even go to Matthew 4 and Jesus being tempted by Satan, why is this a very important passage to see first?
You've got nothing to say when you get to the judgment day. You can't look him in the eye and say, well, you never was tempted like me.
That's right.
Like I was.
So in other words, Matthew 4 has to be legitimate. It wasn't shadow boxing, as you might say. It wasn't just a meaningless presentation of just kind of going through the motions of temptations for symbolic reasons. Based on Hebrews 4, wouldn't you have to say what happens in Matthew 4 and Luke 4 is legitimate? Very good. Some of the words, what does sympathize mean? And I actually like, yours said empathize, and this version I'm reading had sympathy. And I know there's a slight variation of those, but what are the 2 words together, what does that say to you? Sympathize or empathize. What does that mean? Understand. Okay. So how does that tie into temptation then? What are we? If he sympathize or empathize with your temptations, what does that say about his own temptations?
I did a class one time. It was on the empathy.
I do remember that. I do remember that vaguely.
Because it's empathy, you've gone through it, you understand it. Sympathy, you're like, hey, I'm sorry, but empathy is, hey, I've been through it, I understand.
Wait, I remember like before I lost one of my parents, before I lost my, like I can grieve with the family. You know what I mean? I've done funerals before that event. Every funeral after that hits differently because now I'm like, oh no, I get it. Before, I was tried to grieve with the family and I felt very sorry, and I'm with you in that moment. After having experienced it myself, it's a whole nother experience. And I think that's kind of and so what does that say then? Again, about Matthew 4, what is the legitimacy of Jesus's temptation? I can't explain that he was God, and we're going to get into some things about that he knew, didn't know, abilities, and all that stuff like that. But as far as this verse says, the temptations had to be real. He's been there. And some of the verses like, but was tempted in all points, just like we are. Hebrews 2:18, just a little bit different flavor.
This is the NLT.
Okay.
Since he himself has gone through suffering and testing, he is able to help us when we are being tested.
He himself has gone through suffering and testing. And that's why he can come to give our aid. Aren't you thankful for a mediator like that? It's kind of like, and this is a terrible reference, but it's like we're supposed to have government that's of the people and for the people, and they're supposed to be able to relate to us so they can help make decisions in our lives. How realistic is that? Do you want a God or a Jesus that's like your governor or your senator? That lives on a different pay scale than you, that has a different insurance than you, that has different guarantees and assurities and securities that you don't have. Oh, but they're making decisions and they really understand what you're going through, right? Do you want a faraway God? Is that what we have? The Bette Midler song, From a Distance, God is Watching Us. Is it really from a distance? Or did he come and he walked and he took on? And I'm starting here just to say, you have to start here. Otherwise, you'll say, well, maybe not really in Matthew 4. Did he really, or could he do this, or could he do that? Hebrews, to me, kind of lays that to rest, does it not? We didn't even get into the Hebrews part about he learned through the things that he suffered. You know what I mean? Like, I needed to start there. I needed you to see that. Now we can go to Matthew 4, because it'll head off that discussion at the past, that when you start thinking, well, he cheated it or he shortcutted. It's not. All right, so let's read Matthew 4, 1 through 11. Vaughn, can I give you that whole enchilada? You had a nice, long, hard day as a reading coach, and now I just dump it on you all over again. Here we go.
Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came to him and said, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." Jesus answered, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." Jesus answered him, "It is also written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, the devil took him to the very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. "All this I will give you," he said, "if you will bow down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then the devil left him, and angels came and attended him.
All right, just to start at the ending of this, because it relates to what we just said. What does verse 11 tell you about the legitimacy of this temptation? Why do you say that?
He's human.
All right.
And it had to hurt him to be that hungry and then resist all the temptations that was right there before him. That he knew, I don't know if he knew that he could have done it, but he could have prayed to the Father and had it done.
Just thinking about, go ahead, John Henry.
We don't know. It just says he's hungry. We don't know. He might have been awake for 40 days, 40 nights.
So where I want to go with that is, if angels have to come and minister, it's really easy to read this almost like an encyclopedia, and we're going through the list, and we can make ourselves, oh, he responded with scripture every time, and man, he knew it, and it almost just kind of. Verse 11 tells you, where are you going with that, Wes?
Why did the angels come to minister to him if they didn't?
Exactly. So we read it, and it seems just very like, man, Jesus is our champion, and man, he's just firing back scripture, and this is the easiest encounter with Satan, and man, we should model ours with that, whatever. If angels are coming to, if it was just as simple as food, the disciples can bring food. There has been, in the midst of this, you need to understand the legitimacy of what Satan is offering here was bad enough that he needs ministering too. He's psychologically, emotionally, he is God and human at the same time, but he's going through this in the flesh, and he needed help and encouragement. Just all of these things color the fact that as we start breaking down the individual temptations, they were real. You can't just say, oh, he used his deity credit card and swiped it and bypassed this stuff. It was real. And it was just as real. And that helps. To me, where I'm going with that is kind of the end and the big picture of all this is he suffered like we do. He needed ministering to after. Can you relate to that? And it doesn't help you to know that he can relate to you in that. That's right. You have to. I think too many times I've done this procedural. I preach this text and it's, almost spend the whole time talking about we need to answer every temptation with scripture. And yes, he did that, but we act like that's just the easiest thing in the world. And there still wasn't an emotional roller coaster and an anxiety, or not maybe anxiety ain't the word, but it's tension. In the garden, this is the wilderness, but in the garden, how intense was that, prayer? I call it temptation for any other purpose. How intense was it in the garden before he goes to the cross? Crying blood, agonizing, anguishing, wrestling with God. Let this cup pass. What does that mean? But what's another way of saying let this, Father, if it be your will, let this cup pass. I don't want to do it. Not that I don't want to, but dread, knowing what's coming. Do I think that Jesus ever doubted? Do I think that he didn't know the future and all of that stuff? Do you see that even knowing the future doesn't necessarily take away the desperation of the midst of temptation in the flesh? Yes.
He's saying, he knew exactly how he was going to get treated, what was going to happen to him, what he was going to have to go through before it happened to him, and he was just hurt.
So sometimes maybe I'm a little too hard on people because not everybody grieves the same. Not everybody handles different temptations the same. But it's almost like, well, I do firmly believe, and I will shout it from the rooftops, that when you are a Christian, we do handle adversity differently. We have a power and a truth to tap into that not everybody does, right? There's no question. And we die differently. Funerals for Christians, totally different mentality than, so that's absolutely true. Knowing that this world is not our home, knowing that something better is waiting for us, knowing that we're getting glorified bodies, all of that is very real and tangible and helpful truth. Does that take away from the pain in the moment? The agonizing and the anguish in the moment? And just knowing that, how it doesn't immediately cure it for you, do you see it doesn't immediately cure it for Jesus in the flesh either? And sometimes I think it's just too easy to think, oh, well, he knew, so. Look, I've never had such an intensity where I had blood run out of my face, that I'm literally just kind of wrestling with something. It's intense, Miss Terry.
Well, if he was going to be the sacrifice for us, it had to be like us.
That's right.
It had to experience what we experienced.
That's right. For it to be legitimate, for God to be just, and for it to all be above board, he can't cheat. That's the key. Yep. That's right. And I'm just going to put all my cards on the table. There are aspects of where you see deity and humanity at the same time. He knows stuff. He does stuff. I can't explain how he can be God and be human in the appearance of man. I don't have the ability to articulate how that all works. All I can tell is there are enough glimpses of the humanity that I know he didn't cheat. He didn't cheat. Hebrews 4 tells me that. Matthew 4:11 tells me that. So if he couldn't cheat, then neither can we. So, and what that takes away from then is, does Jesus know? Does Jesus care? Does he understand? All right, so anything puzzle you about the first temptation? What is the first one? Turn the stones to bread. What's the big deal about that? I mean, why does that even matter? Like, seriously, like, I mean, he's done stuff, whatever. Like, why does that matter? What's the big deal about that? Like, if Jesus, I mean, if Satan would have said, hey, murder somebody, kill somebody, tell a lie, do something, like, what's the big deal? And even Jesus's reaction is what? Man shall not live by bread alone, but every word proceeds from the mouth of God. You know, later he turns water into wine. He multiplies loaves and fishes. So what's the big deal here about this one?
Have you ever been hungry?
So here's my best. I just saw a meme about that. Can you really answer? If you've never had to question where your next meal is coming from, I don't think I've ever been hungry. Like I felt hunger. I'm not going to say I haven't felt what we as Americans would define as hunger. But if you've never been in a scenario where you literally didn't know how you were going to get your next meal, you've never been hungry.
He's been 40 days.
40 days.
Nights without anything.
All
I
right.
believe I could have made 4 days.
So some people think that the temptation is, well, use your power for selfish reasons, and Jesus never did that. And I think that's close. He doesn't use his deity credit card to make this one. But I think there's something more going on here. What's Jesus's mission? Why is he here in the flesh? Why did he have to take on flesh? Sin, but yes, but like why? Yeah, but we can deal with sin. Why flesh? What does Jesus have to do? Why does he have to take on flesh? He's got to hurt, and ultimately, he has to die. What do you say, Mr. West?
And also to show that it can be done.
Okay.
And that's, to me, the tie between the man and the deity. He could have, if
That's
he
right.
wanted to at any moment, but to prove that it could be done in the flesh, you're not going to tempt me above what I can't take.
So that's exactly where I'm going, and I have a thought. It basically is, he's got to come, he's got to suffer, he's got to die, he's got to do that to show us the way. To accomplish that mission, he's got to live this life and eventually die on the same terms as we do. What this temptation then, what Satan's really tempting is, use your credit card. Cheat. You have, and here's my thing about it. Here's the question I was going to ask. It's one thing to be, does it almost, when you say he could have done some things, doesn't that actually make it more difficult? You know, it's kind of like sometimes like, we can talk about like temptation of like finances or money. You know, like there's certain aspects of that I'm never going to have to worry about. You know what I mean? Like, or like when you don't have like, like the maybe the pride of like whooping Joel right here in front of all of you. Like I might be tempted to just do that just to show you guys like that. That would just feel a lot of fun to do. Why are you laughing about that? Yeah, exactly. When you don't have the ability to do it, is this as big of a temptation? Right? That's the whole point. But let's say I did have that ability. All right, let's put it in your terms. I'm going to challenge Shane to a shoot-off, right? Like what? Carol like gave me a smirk, just so you know, like right off the bat. Like, what? I'm gonna challenge Carol to a mullet shooting contest, right? Like, why are y'all laughing? So my side, that's a joke. Now flip the script. Carol challenged me to a mullet shooting contest. You know what I mean? Like she had, and I don't know if I illustrated the right way, but he could have called 10,000. Can he turn stones into bread at the flip? He can make fish and loaves of bread multiply at will to 5,000 people. The temptation is cheat. And if Jesus does cheat, it's just a little bit of hunger. Look, I mean, I know it's 40 days. I know it's 40 days. You've been fasting, and maybe that is the understatement of the Bible. Like where it says, when he had been fasting 40 days and 40 nights afterward. I mean, is that, you know what I mean? It's got, okay, right. I got it. But if every time Jesus was tired, if every time Jesus was thirsty, if every time Jesus was hungry, if every time Jesus was sick, if every time Jesus was threatened by an enemy and all of the other trials of humanity, if he could just do a little miracle and escape for a few hours, if he does that, then what does that take away? I wasn't going there, but it takes away his humanity. He's not tempted in all points as are we. And that doesn't help me then. If he can use the credit card and I don't have a credit card, then that's not on equal terms. John, where are you going to go?
That very moment knows good and well that he can't do that. And he knows it. Like I said, we don't know if he's been awake for 40 days before.
That's right.
We do know it tells us he ain't ate or drank anything. And he's thinking, well, I'm going to set him up right now. Every one of these is just like, he knows he's dealing with God / man, all together.
Satan knows the champion has come in wounded condition.
Right. And he's thinking he's going to trip him up.
That's right. And what does that give its own application?
Yeah.
When does Satan come challenge him? He's already taken on flesh. That's enough of a drop. But now we've taken him at 40 days and 40 nights of fast. Is there maybe some providence of why God would allow Satan to come to him at his lowest moment? What does that do for you? How does that? Knowing that Satan came to Jesus, to me, it's another one of these, he didn't get to use the credit. When does a lot of times Satan show up to you? When you're in your weakest moment. When is it that I can stand strong in here. I can stand strong when my health is going good. I can mentally overcome when I got a few dollars saved in the bank and I'm feeling fairly comfortable. But when money gets tight, your health gets bad, and you're scared to death about something going on that you have no control over, does the temptation factor multiply? And that's when Satan comes. Now, same thing, tracking on the same. I'm still on this track of how big of a deal is it stones to bread? It's really, it's just, it's not that big of a deal. To me, that's another point though about the subtlety of Satan. Just a little miracle here to just escape the frailty of the flesh, and really it's not that big of a deal. Fast forward 3 years to the cross. Was Jesus' death like ours? No, in one sense that I've never been crucified, but breathing his last. So you go through that the way that we do? Just do a little miracle. How would we even know if you just on the cross flip the switch where you're not feeling it? You know what I mean? Joe, where are we going with that?
There's something to be said for being able to record it at any time.
Yes.
And then having to do something and go through a hard time where there is no out.
Yeah.
That's it's terrible that you had to go through that, but you didn't have an exit strategy. You didn't have anything. You just had to endure. For somebody that didn't have to endure it and chose to, that carries a totally different weight.
Any of you guys watching? I think it's on the History Channel. That it's been multiple years or seasons now of Alone, where they send people to the island with like 10 tools, and it's basically who last man standing. Now you do get $500,000. I mean, but the temptation a lot of them talk about is at any moment, what can they do? They push that button and the boat comes or the helicopter comes and you get in it. And for a lot of them, you get to want to see your family. You don't think that applies to Jesus? Think Hebrews chapter 12. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross. What's the joy set before him? And some people are what's complicated? He's getting to go home. There's a passage in John 17 where he's in the middle of prayer, and it's almost like he allows his mind to go back to the time before man was created and he was dwelling with his Father. In other words, in the flesh, Jesus is sitting around the table and his mind is flashing back to a time where he was in fellowship and equality with God. He's letting his mind go back. Glorify them with the glory that I had before the world. I mean, he's going back to the time, you know what I mean? So you think about they get long, they want to go home, that temptation. taking, like a lot of them talk about, man, if I could just take a shower. Man, if I could eat a cheeseburger. Like one guy said, man, he's like literally desperate for just a hug, for human touch. You don't think in a more cosmic way that Jesus was ready to drop this robe of flesh and be in his former glory again? And at any time, he has the power to push the exit button. At any, that makes it worse than and really, like, he's not only tempted in all points as are we, brethren, he's been tempted beyond points as we, because you and I, do you have that ability to push that button and cash in the cards? Can you call 10,000 angels? So, and I think like where you're tracking was that almost makes it worse on him that he can take the shortcut. I don't have the choice. Oops, did you say something? It just, even just the simplicity of it, just a little nugget that he didn't cheat. You don't have to turn there, but just John 19:28, one of the statements he makes from the cross is, I'm thirsty. I mean, that's a simple, and do you remember like what happens? One of the soldiers, what's he do, Brando? I mean, it's bitter, but he just some kind, I mean, just, I hate to even say think about it, but like the cotton mouth going on. I mean, you're literally up there agonizing, the sun beating down, and you've been tortured and beaten, whatever. And it literally is one, he doesn't say 7 statements is all he makes around, and one of them is, I'm thirsty. It's that simple, but that profound. Is he using the credit card? I thirst. So he was tempted in the flesh, just as we are, and not just once. In fact, like to your point, Joel, how is that not a constant temptation to pull the ripcord? How is that not a constant? And then you think, like, you ever get like extra, like the burden of stress is worse, like the burden of responsibility, knowing you're responsible for something? Like husbands being like financially responsible for the welfare of your family. Is that a burden that you carry at times? Planning for the future, various things like that. Just think, like, no, sometimes responsibility can just be a burden to carry. How about the burden of the salvation of humanity when you're in this condition is on your shoulder? Because if he does pull the ripcord, what other plan do we have? One of my favorite statements as the final week is leading up to, it says he set his face for Jerusalem. And what that is kind of like, I'm dug in. There is no detour. Now, the only possible chink I would offer to that is that garden prayer is pretty close to, not that I've changed my mission. Like I just finished season 2 of Alone. And there's one time where this guy is literally, he comes in second place, but he's literally crying over the bucket, like praying for food. Like he's been like, and like these are guys that like, they're trying to change their family's livelihood. It's not, I mean, it is about the money, but he's like, what can $500,000 do to like set, and he's literally, because this is a guy, like one person had a salmon run, and this guy's literally been living off like them little periwinkle snail things for 60 days. And he's literally at one point over the bucket praying for food. Like that just, I don't know. That gives me a small picture of what's going on. So does he cheat? Stones to bread. Subtle, right? And hits him there first. And let me get you thinking about your stomach before I even get into the next two. And now we're really going to turn the heat up.
Just think about what we were saying about how the ability to exit a situation or pull that ripcord is such. It adds to the temptation. And for some reason, my brain went to, what about retaliation?
Yeah.
Think about the urge of there's so many times in his life that, don't you know, he would have,
So back to the me and Joel illustration. Imagine me just like getting tweezers and plucking his beard hairs out one by one. You know what I mean?
I'm sorry, Joel.
You know what I mean? Like just imagine, and he has to just constantly. Well, think about it in being in law enforcement, and you're there for people's best interest, and sometimes saving their lives, and they're dog cussing you and shooting at you. You mean it's just like, and you have the ability to crush that. And you spoke these cockroaches into existence. You know what I mean? Like I was listening to the Bible cast today, and they were talking about Psalm chapter 8. Like, we were made out of dust. And basically the way he words it is, it's like, we're dirt bags compared to the heavenlies. And like dirtbag was perfect because we were created out of so one of us dirt bags has literally the audacity to mock him and strike him and the restraint. Like one of my preacher friends said, I don't think Peter was aiming for an ear, right? And if Peter wanted to do that, the temptation for Jesus to want to do that to a cockroach of a human being that probably deserves it and probably going to be punished for eternity anyway. So why not just hasten the process? That's an excellent point. The ripcord applies in a lot of different places. It's not just, I can escape. No. I can pull out my crown and all of my credit cards and annihilate. That's just the first one. So now I've got him hungry, and I'm working on him, got him thinking about his stomach. Now, Matthew and Luke have they have the same first one. Matthew and Luke, the second and third one, is a different order. I think there's a little bit different purpose that each gospel is going. I really don't have to detour on that because as far as our purposes tonight, it really doesn't affect it. But the second and third one is reversed in Matthew and Luke. All right? So which one do you want to follow? It's your choice. I can go either one first. We're already in Matthew. Let's go to the second one. All right, so what's he do in the second one in Matthew? Takes him up to the pinnacle of the holy city, of the temple, and asks him to do what? Jump down. And now Satan's getting really good. What does he add to the temptation? Oh, man, he's got some scripture now to go with it. What's he say, Joel?
He will order his angels to protect you.
Yeah.
And they will hold you up with their hands so you won't even hurt your foot on the stone.
Man. And Jesus answers, you shall not tempt the Lord your God. So, I hate heights. This is not a temptation for me at all. Nope. I don't even want to get close to the edge. Not a temptation here. Why do this? Jesus' response, I think, gives us there's more going on here than just jumping off and testing God. The passage that Jesus quotes from is Deuteronomy 6, verse 16, which has to do with the incident at Massah, which is found in Exodus 17, 1 through 7, where the people are in the wilderness wandering and they cry out for water. Anything wrong with crying out for water when you're thirsty? Jesus does. But in Exodus 17, they add something to it. They don't just cry out for water. They add to that, is the Lord among us or not? The passage that he quotes from, you shall not tempt your Lord, is based in when the people were crying out for water. And not just, is there water? God, can you give you water? But are you here or not? Do you care or not? Do you see or not? Are you capable or not? How does that relate to what Jesus is going on through here? What's the road ahead look like for Jesus? This is just the beginning. This is just the beginning. He's just been baptized. We're just getting started with ministry, right? What does the road ahead for Jesus look like? And I think part of the temptation here is, do you really want to walk that road to Jerusalem without knowing for sure that he's with you? And this is where I think we can't relate to. He's deity, knows he's deity, but for the first time in his existence, what state is he in? And I'm in a different shell that is vulnerable. Has deity ever felt hunger before? Deity ever got a sunburn before? Deity ever had your feet get tired after walking all day? There's times he had to sit down and relieve himself. Times he had to escape from the mob of people because in the flesh, God was wore out. You don't, and that's where I feel like the subtlety again of this one here is, why walk this road? Because, man, when I tell you he's coming at Jesus in his lowest, again, what's he been doing for 40 days? He's coming at him when the first, like when the humanity, and I mean, he's grew in wisdom and stature and favor. He's been growing for, I mean, he's 30, but now he's really he's been fasting 40 days and 40 nights. Just throw yourself, he's got you. Do it to just and I think that some of the temptation here is make God prove he's among you or not. And do you get why that would really be a temptation? You think, well, he's God. See, this is why we got to go to those Hebrews 4 and Matthew 4:11. Him needing ministering to, psychologically, there's some stuff going on in the head of Jesus of Nazareth. You're a human now. Are you sure you can do this? You sure you want to do this? Think about, and man, there's a lot going on. There's so much just baggage behind it. But the psalm that he quotes, one of the statements he makes on the cross is Psalm 22, verse 1. Anybody remember what that one is? My God, what? And so, to my dishonor, in my youth, I kind of just said, well, Jesus was just quoting scripture so everybody could go see it. You don't think there's any... The psalmist that wrote Psalm 22, do you think that was just words, or do you think he felt at times alone? Just like the Alone series. They're not alone. They can push the button anytime. But boy, do I know that you're there? Or like one of the illustrations, I try to think of different ways to illustrate this. Like, have you ever heard the story of kind of the rite of passage where the father takes his son to the woods, and in order to kind of pass this, you got to sit on this stump in the woods all night long by yourself. Right? You ever heard that story about the father doing that? That kind of being a culture's rite of passage. And what the boy doesn't know, and this is kind of the cool part, how far you reckon away Dad is? He's and the boy wakes in the morning to find out that the father's been there all along. That psalmist, when he writes that, is it just words, or do you think he feels it? Let me ask you this. We're all God-fearing people, and we're Christians right here. We're walking the walk. I believe in God. I believe I believe in the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. You ever felt alone and wondered? God, do you see? God, do you care? God, if you're really there, why? With what I saw today, where are you going to go, Brando?
I maybe think it's too far ahead, but Christ took on the sin of the world on the cross, and he may have felt what hell feels like, because God is not where sin is, and he, for the first time, he knew God's presence was no longer there.
So one of my preaching mentors, I was preaching a lesson on, and I like the song, what's the song that says the Father turns his face away? It's one of my favorites. Tyler, you lead it. The Father turns his face away. I don't know. I'll think that. Oh, it's one of my favorites. But I was preaching a lesson that's a little bit of hyperbole. That the Father never really left him. He never was abandoned. And I think that is true. Does God ever leave the righteous? But, and this is where my mentor, after I preached that lesson, very deadly, said, "Why don't you come to the house Tuesday and let's study about this a little bit?" Just, kind of like taking Apollos, and teaching him the way more accurately. He goes, I realize that there is a sense in which, did God ever leave Jesus and abandon him? No. But do you think in the flesh he felt a separation? Because of not being able to pull the ripcord, because of not being able to use the... Is there any sense in that garden and hanging on that cross that he felt a separation? And so much symbolic, where you're talking about, where the scapegoat, where literally the priest would confess the sins of the people on that animal and then send them out. Jesus is not just the sacrificial lamb that dies. Jesus is also the scapegoat that carries the sin. He's got, we talked about the burden of responsibility. And part of let the cup pass from me, and I think I've done a lesson on propitiation before. That's the word picture behind that, is drinking the cup of God's wrath. And it's more than just, and it has to be more than just crucifixion. That's bad enough. But is Jesus the only human being that was ever crucified? No. It's not just the anguish and torture of crucifixion, because he's not the only one to go through that. He is the only one to go through that with the load of sin attached to him, facing the cup of God's wrath. You don't, psychologically, do you understand what that has to do? To feel the wrath of your Father that you've never felt before? You're having to satisfy the wrath. All of this, and I've been in preacher studies where we try to poo-poo this away, and it's more of a theological discussion. Let's just be real. If the words that we preach and the concepts that we believe are true, there's more than going on here than just symbolically dying. Am I wrong? Is he just another person? Is it just another death? Or is there something extra special about him doing this? And what is he taking on? To satisfy the wrath of God. It's not just that he was crucified and killed in a really terrible way. That is part of it. But he's not the only one that had that done to him. He is the only one to have him done with it to satisfy the wrath and anger of God. And in some sense, Brando, Psalm 22, verse 1, when he speaks that from the cross, you don't think there's some semblance of feeling abandoned or separated or forsaken. Does he ultimately know he's not forsaken? The psalm goes to that. After he spends 19 or 20 verses about God, don't you see this? And God, why haven't you done that? He does say in the prayer, and it changes the tenor, I know that I called and you answered. So does Jesus know God was there all along? Absolutely. But in the moment, is he feeling it? Better believe he is.
And another example of he could have put.
He could have put. And so,
no other crucified man could have done that.
So let me bring it home to you. Again, are there times you just really wish you could know for sure that God is there? Or that he sees or that he cares? You ever wish, like Gideon, you could put your fleece out and God answer in a obviously miraculous way? God, I just need a little sign. Just wink. And I do believe in praying that way. I believe in laying out the fleece like Gideon. I do believe that God does give us winks along and along, but do you always get those? Do you always get a little voice whispering and telling you it's okay? Do you always get that? That's not been my experience, and hopefully doesn't mean that I'm not connected as I need to be, but what's wrong with this? Tempting God. Put God to the test. It's a crisis of faith. We are commanded, walk by and not by. Walk by faith, and part of faith is I don't see. I don't know. We walk by faith and not by sight. Does Jesus really need that, though? 40 days earlier, he'd heard, this is my beloved son in whom I am well pleased. You know how many miracles Jesus has done up to this point? In my chronological study, I don't think he's done any. And even if he did, Elijah did miracles and was ready to die, right? He did a miraculous sign, so, that's not a big deal. Moses did miraculous things and was ready to die. Jonah was a prophet of God that had God talking to him directly and even saves an entire city, and Jonah is ready to die. What I want you to see is Jesus is so like us that he had to walk without knowing beyond a shadow of a doubt in his humanity that God was there. His death wasn't different than yours. I think he believed. I think there's no question of knowing who he was and that God was there. But he still had to go by faith. Because this is the first time he's ever been in the flesh. What a help and a comfort to hear that he was tempted like us. All right, I'm going to save the biggie, the crescendo, the one that led us to this study for next week. Because the one that we really got to is the Jesus, does Satan have any kingdom to offer? Well, do you want me to give you some passages to study before we come back? Do you have a pen and paper or a phone you want to write these down? You don't have to. We're going to go through them together, but let me give you some. Just in case you think, and this is why I started the way I did. It has to be real or it doesn't mean anything. All right? And you say, well, he was just lying. Well, then that's not a temptation. Let me give you some passages. Matthew 12, 25 and 26 is going to talk about Satan's kingdom. Matthew 12, 25 and 26. The second one is 2 Corinthians 4, verse 4, a title that the Satan wears. And Ephesians 2, verse 2, another title that the Satan wears. If you don't think that that was something he legitimately got. And then also, this is one place that I would like for you to cross-reference the Luke account. I'll just read it for you to give you a hint of where we're going. Luke 4 and verse 6 says this. And this didn't come up in Matthew. And see if this tracks it all with what you and Matt were talking about. In Luke 4, verse 6, Satan says to him, I will give you all their authority and splendor. It has been given to me, and I can give it to anyone I want. Luke 4, verse 6, Satan tells Jesus, this authority has been given to me, and I can give it to anybody I want. That's a little extra flavor that's not in Matthew. Now, you can say it's a lie, and we'll talk about that. You can see if he has a kingdom to offer or not, but that's what this is a doozy. It's a good one. And this one takes me down my rabbit hole that I've been in all day long that I just, that divine counsel that's got both good and bad present. The sons of God, the other Elohims. Can I just give you a tiny little? We're used to like capital G God studies. There is a lowercase g God study. And just because he says like that in one passage he's called the God of gods. God, the Father, is not denying that there are lowercase g celestial beings. And some are good and some are evil. There are multiple Elohims, which is new for me to learn because Elohim is one of the names for God. But in Scripture, in multiple places in your Old Testament, Elohim is used lowercase e. Elohims. He's just the Elohim of Elohims. He's the Elohim. So it's all part of that. We'll dig. We'll dig. I've given you some passages, gave you something to study, but we'll pick up with the third temptation next Wednesday. You don't want to miss that one. Where I'll go down the rabbit hole, and hopefully that's not me going into the noose and give him enough cord, he'll hang himself. We'll see. It's all good stuff, man. Anything good you got out of tonight? Not worth being here? Wish you just stayed home and slept in? Anything you can use? Let me just give you that, like I said, before we close, anything you can take home from what we studied tonight?
He was given choice, yes, well.
So,
His choice was to do right.
and his choice had a lot riding on it. But you know what? Your choice has a lot riding on it. Everyday choice you make has a lot riding on it. Maybe not quite as much as his, but it's got your eternal destination riding on it. So choose wisely. Mr. Phil?
I think his work was just beginning. He had work to do.
On that point, he's got a huge work. He's got a whole ministry ahead of him. And Satan is trying to psychologically throw him off his game before he can even start. Does he do that to you? Every time you get a good idea for a good work or a good inclination to go serve in some way, does he not always find some kind of distraction or excuse or psychological? Oh, you can't do that. That's not going to work. It's not worth it. Oh, man. And that negative self-talk that we get into, and Satan will do everything he can to discourage you from doing. I think you're all over. That's a great point. A great point. Anything else before we're rocking out of here?
I always think about when he was 30, that's when his ministry
Mm-hmm.
started. And it lasted only 3 years.
That's it. He set the world on fire in 3 years' time. One of our guys, when I was at Roswell, was teaching a class on the ministry of Jesus, and one of his classes, he spent the entire time showing us on a map just some of what we thought was the walking and covering of territory that Jesus did in 3 years' time. You want to talk about physical exhaustion? It was 2 miles from Jerusalem to Bethany just to walk, and that's where he was making that walk every day to go teach in the city and various places like that. It's impressive what he did in 3 years. Very impressive. Miss Terry?
Well, you were talking about the garden, as the man, he had to sit down.
That's it.
Like he
Ooh, that's good. Isn't that a temptation? And so I'm a Christian, and maybe it's the work of Satan, like, be a big boy Christian and handle it on your own. You ever feel that one? I mean, I do, and maybe that's just me or whatever, but it's almost like you feel guilty asking for help. You feel guilty admitting that I'm less than or I can. Man, my faith should be stronger, and I should be able to whip this, and why I can't. And man, that is Satan telling you, do it on your own. Do it on your own. And even Jesus had to go somewhere for strength. And so that's why don't we? Mr. West? No. Wasn't that your chapel today, Tyler? How many righteous are there? No, not one. And we all have to have help. So it's not a symbol of weakness. It's actually a symbol of strength to recognize you need help and ask for it. So I think that's a big one. Did I miss anything? What you got? You were just bursting at the seams to say something, Bubba. All right. Mr. Phil, you want to dismiss us with a word of prayer this evening?
Our most gracious and compassionate Heavenly Father, we just thank you for this time we've come together to read and learn more about your word. Thank you for Jesus Christ and being the great teacher that he is to help us to understand more about your law. Not only to understand, but to use it in our everyday lives. Father, we pray for those who will give thanks for the good health that those of us have. And we pray for those who aren't healthy, that they can get the treatments they need to become more healthy and hopefully cured completely. Father, we pray as we go about our daily lives, may your love and grace be with each of us, and we be refreshed and blessed by our time here tonight. In Jesus' name, amen.
Yes, ma'am.